No. Okay. So, hi, Miss Gates. My name is Ali Adib, and I have the honor of being your host in this online meeting. If you could give us a short introduction of your uh, career, and I just want to know you a bit, and our audiences would be so interesting of knowing your career and who you are. Thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be with you tonight. My name is Charlotte Cates. I'm based in Vancouver, in Canada, and I'm the international coordinator of Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, which is an international Arab and Palestinian network of organizations and activists working for the liberation of Palestinian political prisoners as part and parcel of the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. I'm also involved in a number of anti imperialist and Palestine solidarity campaigns, including the International People's Tribunal on U.S. Imperialism, the National Lawyers Guild, and the International Association of Democratic Lawyers.
That's great. Thank you. So may I start my questions? So in order to have.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Uh, you have personally witnessed the encampment and protests that has recently been occurred in Western countries in the universities by students, and you even got arrested for giving a speech on in supporting Hamas or Palestine in general. How do you see these encampment and the protests? What's your take on, and what do you think has motivated and make these actually protests so widespread in the Western countries?
Well, of course, when we take a look at the genocide that's happening in occupied Palestine right now, it's a genocide that's being carried out by the Zionist army, by the Zionist regime, but it's a genocide that's also being funded and backed by the United States, of course, the head, but also by Canada, by Britain, by Germany, by France. All of these imperialist Western powers are fully participating in the genocide against the Palestinian people. And the fact is that people in the West, especially young people, especially students, are being confronted every single day with news and information directly from occupied Palestine, where they are seeing what this policy, what this practice of imperialism, what the US's practice of sending billions of dollars in weaponry to the Zionist regime is actually doing and what that looks like. And that looks like 40,000 Palestinians dead, massacred in attacks on mosques and hospitals and schools and residential buildings and refugee camps. It looks like the mass slaughter of Palestinian children. It looks like the ongoing theft of land and destruction of lives. And what's been happening is that the true nature of the Zionist regime has been exposed for so many people. Nobody's willing to believe the lies anymore about the Zionist regime, and nobody's willing to ignore the humanity of the Palestinian people. And so, one of the reasons why we're seeing this uprising, this revolt taking place on campuses is also because, US universities are often these, multi-million or multi-billion dollar operations. Private universities own massive amounts of real estate. Their boards of governors are full of corporate directors and people who are directly involved in uh, the mechanisms of the intelligence agencies, the defense industry, military contractors. These companies are directly involved in running the universities, and these universities' multi-billion dollar endowment funds are directly invested in companies that are linked to and providing weapons to the Zionist regime to carry out this genocide. So, if people want to take action where they are to bring that to stop, then what's a more logical place for students to do that than on their campuses? And so, what we're seeing is the culmination of an absolute level of very basic human outrage at the crimes being carried out and at the genocide being carried out by the Zionist regime with the full support of these imperialist states, with people doing everything they can, even in their limited space of campus, to say that this has got to come to an end and this has got to stop.
Thank you. That was great. Uh, do you think do you think these kind of protests is actually representing the whole people of America, Canada, and the students are the representative of these people?
Well, it's always difficult to talk about the representative of all people, because like when we take a look at, for example, what comes on Western mainstream media, there is a lot of misinformation, disinformation, outright lies, and manipulation of the media. It's practically like watching a press release by the Zionist army a lot of the time. When we look at kind of these State Department press conferences where US government officials just offer more and more excuses and justifications for providing billions of dollars in weaponry for the slaughter of Palestinians, there's a lot of people who are getting their information from mainstream media, from politicians, and that's anti-Palestinian information. But it's also true, and it's particularly true, and it's backed up by polling data too, that particularly among younger people and among the younger generation, there is an absolute generational shift in which people are coming to terms with the reality of what's taking place in Palestine, and not just what's happening in Palestine right now and for the past 7 months, but for the past 76 years. And that's also revealing the nature of imperialism to many. And so these aren't just protests against, what the Zionist regime is doing. They're also rising up against what the US is doing. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing these incredibly violent police attacks and assaults, these, hundreds of militarized police going in a military formation to invade a campus, assault students, fire tear gas, fire rubber bullets, invade university buildings, and just essentially impose this like military regime on students for protesting, for calling for divestment from the Zionist project.
Mhm. That's right. My question would be especially about what you have just said. Considering the Western states claims to be the strong advocates of human rights, especially the right to freedom of expression and the right to peaceful assembly, and they always criticize other countries for not upholding these rights. And do we see a kind of double standard in their reaction to these protests?
Well, I mean, there's certainly the exposure of the hypocrisy of the Western states. And it's clear that they have no interest in freedom of expression as such or democracy as such. This is just a cudgel to be used against those states that refuse to allow their people and their resources to be exploited for the benefit of imperialism. From Venezuela to Iran to Syria to Cuba to countries around the world that are targeted by US imperialism and US sanctions. These kinds of allegations are just always kind of trotted out as an excuse to be in order so that these countries should be forced to allow the United States in to steal their natural resources, exploit the wealth and the labor of the people for the profit of the U.S. and its partners in Britain, France, Germany, Canada, and elsewhere. And so it's very obvious that there is no commitment to freedom of expression at all. What we're seeing throughout the United States are a number of state legislatures passing laws essentially that seek to make it illegal to boycott Israel. I myself was arrested here in Canada because I gave a speech vocally supporting the Palestinian resistance, which is the Palestinian armed resistance specifically, including the military operation on October 7th, because this is a military action by the resistance that changed the world and presented the possibility of a Palestine free of Zionism and a region free of imperialism. And this is something that was so unacceptable, even though Palestinian resistance is completely legal under international law, that, police were sent to arrest me And I was given orders that I can't attend any protest demonstrations or assemblies until October 8th of this year. In Germany, we are seeing rallies and protests and conferences shut down by massive groups of police. There have been over 3,000 students in the United States arrested in just the past few weeks. There are hundreds of people in France being prosecuted for what they call apology for terrorism, for saying that Palestinians have the right to resist. So this shows the reality of what that commitment to democracy is. It's the same commitment they've always shown around the world, which is that people's rights can be trampled on, suppressed, and violated on a regular basis by imperialist regimes and their client states. Um, and all of that is necessary in order to ensure the exploitation of the wealth and resources of the people of the world by these imperialist powers. And now that reality is coming home as well.
Yeah. I have a question that may be the question of lots of people in all over the world. Why do you think the Western countries are sacrificing humanity, the principles of humanity, the principles of international law for Israel? What is so special about Israel?
Well, Israel is a settler colonial Zionist project in occupied Palestine. The Western powers have always been aligned with the Zionist movement. I mean, Theodore Herzl openly spoke about this as a colonial project in a treaty to Cecil Rhodes. The Zionist project was backed by Britain as far as its interests in keeping the entire Arab and Iranian regime under its control. Currently, it's being backed by the United States. U.S. politicians, Joe Biden, U.S. president, said that decades ago, if there wasn't an Israel, we would have to create one because it's viewed as an outpost of U.S. interests in the region. And one of the things that the rising power of the Palestinian resistance, as shown quite brilliantly on October 7th, 2023, as well as the rising power of all of the forces of resistance in the region, from the Lebanese resistance, the government and people and armed forces and Ansar Allah movement of Yemen, certainly the role of Iran, the Islamic resistance in Iraq, the people of Syria, and forces throughout the region are rising and uniting together, especially combined with the growing influence and power of China, for example. Um, Essentially the U.S. and its imperialist partners in the West view this genocide by the Zionist project as like this attempt to save their power and their project in the region, to preserve their hegemony against people's rights to self-determination, against people's rights to determine and control their own future. And so they're willing to do anything necessary, as far as they see, in order to preserve that control, that domination, and that hegemony. And right now, that has meant backing this genocide to the hilt and maybe uttering a few critical words from time to time. But those critical words are being combined with billions of dollars in weaponry being sent to the Zionists to rain death and destruction down upon the Palestinian people.
Mhm. And with regard to these protests, do you think that they will have any impact on Western countries with regard to their policies? Will they change the decisions of the major policymakers? How do you see their
It is
future?
certainly possible that they may, because the one of the ways in which imperialist projects have always been defeated is when the resistance of the people on the ground leads to a point, especially combined with growing resistance and support for that resistance and an international base for that resistance, that it's no longer possible for the imperialist project to be able to maintain their colonial war and their efforts. So when, for example, if we look at the history of both France and the United States in Vietnam, if we look at the history of France in Algeria, if we look at the history of the apartheid project in South Africa, what we're going to see is that all of these projects fell when the imperialists had to choose between their colonial project and their own ability to stand. And so it's definitely in the interests of everybody who wants to see a better future for humanity for these protests to grow and expand and escalate and make it impossible to carry out business as usual. Because when it's impossible for the imperialists to carry out business as usual, then it's also impossible to carry out a genocide as usual. And they will be forced to retreat. But of course, it's not our protest movements that are really on the front lines of pushing that retreat. The front lines of defending humanity and pushing for that retreat are being carried out by the Palestinian resistance, together with the Yemeni resistance, the Lebanese resistance, and all of the forces of resistance in the region. These are the people that are on the front lines, literally fighting every single day to defend humanity against genocide. And so it's up to us to do everything that we can here to make it so that these imperialist powers cannot continue the supply lines of genocide.
Thank you. And this will be the end of my questions. And I'm all ears if you have any additional thing to say, and if you want to add anything, you can carry on.
Uh, well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk with you. The movement is continuing to grow. Just in the past few days, we've seen multiple new encampments throughout the Netherlands and Belgium. The first encampment in Sweden just launched today. And so what we're seeing is really the all of the imperial core seeing this growing uprising that's not just limited to students, but also includes workers, also includes people from all sectors of society who want to bring an end to genocide, who want to be a part of our broad international camp of resistance. And we're going to see all different kinds of attempts of criminalization, repression, arrests, targeting, and harassment. But that's why it's incumbent upon all of us to do everything we can to continue to speak out, to refuse to be silent, to refuse to be silent on Palestine, and to refuse to be silent on the resistance. Because these are the people and forces who are defending humanity against a brutal genocidal attack. And it's time for that attack to come to an end. And it's time for Zionism to be dismantled. So
I
thank you.
thank you for your precious words and your first-handed information and analysis. I thank you for giving us your time, and I just want to end this session here. And if you do not have any other additional uh, thing to say,
No,
okay,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much. Great.